Hi everybody, I'm Jack, the Rambling Raconteur, and I wanted to do a short recap of The Fireclown by Michael Moorcock. It's a science fiction book from the early 1960s, I think 1964, 1965. It's one of his earliest science fiction works. Moorcock, of course, has been writing science fiction since that time, and extraordinarily prolific writer. I've got a shelf here that has a number of his omnibus editions for the Eternal Champion series. So this is The Roads Between the Worlds, and this is the Fireclown on the cover here. And some of these books and some of his books are like series. So he has famously Elric of Meldamone, which is a very popular and influential series. He has the Coram books. I think there are 6 of those. And so he has Kane of Old Mars. He had 3 of those. So he I think it was in the 1990s, they started collecting those very like short, thin books and publishing them in like these omnibus editions. He went through and sort of would revise little bits and pieces to make there be a greater connection across his multiverse that exists within his science fiction and fantasy books, kind of across all of them. This idea of battles between law and chaos, or light and dark, just very, very steeped in different mythologies, but steeped as well in like political events of his day. He sometimes has characters who are stalking horses for real life political figures or real life celebrities. So Fireclown is interesting. It's not part of a larger series within his multiverse. It's a book that is mostly focused on just a couple of characters of whom we don't really ever see any of them in any of his other books again. It's short, it was about 150 pages, and it was really interesting. It deals with a future Earth, remember this is a multiverse, a future Earth in which there are, poverty has basically been eradicated. People though live in like large urban city structures that are 70, 80 stories high, and nobody ever goes to the bottom 10 to 15 stories, which of course is where Earth itself is at. They live up on what they call like the top, and this idea of hierarchy of like, the people who are really powerful live at the top, and then as you work your way down, you get to poorer and poorer levels. We don't really dwell a whole lot on that. It's really just focused on suddenly the Fireclown has appeared down on the first floor of this city that is basically a capital city of Earth. It's in Switzerland. It's just called Swiss City. And there are colonies on Mars and Ganymede. They're barely ever mentioned or discussed. There's some space stations. Again, we go to one, but we don't spend a lot of time on that. It's just very tangential details, just kind of like etched in, not completely colored in and filled in. Our imaginations have to do that. And Moorcock is very good about giving just enough detail to let you know it's a full world, without ever going in and telling you everything that you need to know about that world, every detail, what they eat, how they eat, what they wear, what it looks like, where they sleep. We don't get a bunch of that type of information. And it's good to have a balance of those. So the Fireclown has appeared. The Fireclown is basically telling this materialistic and machine-enabled culture that they need to return to the sun, they need to return to their roots. And he talks about how people, earliest humans worshipped the sun. Why aren't we still doing that? Questioning the value of like intelligence. Why is intelligence a good thing, or is it better to just be conscious? The Fireclown looks at the organization of matter into stars through the, electromagnetic force, gravitational force, strong and weak nuclear interactions. He doesn't specifically mention those, but he talks about the organization of matter into stars as being a better principle for the universe and nature than human intelligence, which goes and modifies things and adapts things and is constantly trying to take the time to think through them. And I will side on the side of human intelligence. But the Fireclown's a passionate figure. And the main characters are a character, Alain Van Beck. He's the illegitimate grandson of a very powerful government minister who wants to run for president of Earth. He's the ex-boyfriend of that political figure's granddaughter, who is, which yes means they're cousins, who is kind of representing this like other political party in the solar house. That's the worldwide government they have. And so he goes to explore who this Fireclown is. He starts to find out, you know, maybe the Fireclown isn't really dangerous. There's something compelling about him, but he's not dangerous per se. And then, of course, a whole series of events occur that really take us towards questions of totalitarianism, police state, the power of the media to misrepresent events. You know, Elaine Van Beck will be having an interaction or a protest, and suddenly the next day in the media, what is shown is, you know, very different from what we saw actually occurred in the narrative. There's a discovery of nuclear arms. Nuclear arms have been banned for 100 years. Did the Fireclown have these? Was he planning to like cleanse the world in a wave of fire? And it moves very quickly. I think I read it in like 2 or 3 sittings, just, you know, sprinting through sections in the evenings. And I enjoyed it. Michael Moorcock has some interesting sensibilities. Sometimes he can be a little heavy-handed. I think I felt the Hawkmoon books were that way. But sometimes he can be very wistful and sentimental and ironic in a way that doesn't betray the ideas he's presenting. So the Fireclown is never explicitly condemned throughout most of the book. And his arguments are presented as theoretically valid, but obviously having ramifications. In the same way, it takes a long time for us to really feel willing to condemn figures throughout the book until we see just who they really are. So I wanted to read a super quick just passage that shows kind of a sense of what the science fiction and what the action of it can feel like. I didn't want to read any of the speeches. An acute sense of melancholy possessed him as he stumbled miserably on, at last arriving back at the office. Wearily, he dumped the emergency bulb down in the main chamber, suddenly becoming conscious of a tremendous heat emanating from some source outside. When he reached the entrance, the guards had gone. Somewhere in the distance, he heard shouts and other noises. As he reached the opening onto the main corridor, he saw that it was ablaze with light, and the light, a weird green-blue blaze, was coming from the Fireclown's great cavern. A policeman ran past him, and Elaine shouted, "What's happening?" Fire! The policeman continued to run. Now, pouring like a torrent, the flames were eddying down the corridor, a surging, swiftly moving inferno. There was nothing for the fire to feed on, yet it moved just the same, as if of its own volition. Fascinated, Elaine watched it approach. The heat was soon unbearable, and he backed into the chamber. Only at that moment did it dawn on him that he should have run towards the ramps. He was completely trapped. Also, the laboratory contained inflammable chemicals which would ignite immediately the blaze reached them. He ran towards the entrance again, stupefied by the heat, and saw that it was too late. The wall of heaving flame had almost reached him. He still felt no panic. Part of him almost welcomed the flames. But the air was becoming less and less breathable. He wrenched open doors, looking for another exit. The only possible one seemed to be that which he'd just come back from. And there's a sense of verve and energy to the narrative. And as I said, I don't want to go too much into details because they would become highly spoilery. And this is a short enough book that you could read it if you enjoy that type of science fiction, or if you've ever explored some of Michael Moorcock's more fleshed out and serial characters. This might be one you'd enjoy. I've enjoyed the Eternal Champion sequence and the multiverse, sequence. Sometimes I want that series. Sometimes I want something that's just a little more quick and focused. The descriptions at one point, they do take spaceships to look at stars very closely, and the description of those are just beautiful. I just don't want to read them and spoil everything. So I do recommend this. It's a weird book. It feels almost like it's two different books, not even split in the middle, but a section at the beginning, this middle, and then a section at the end that ties together at the beginning. But it was enjoyable. So that's the Fireclown by Michael Moorcock. Mine was in the Roads Between the Worlds, the Eternal Champion volume, and I think within this it had been retitled The Winds of Limbo. It's from 1964, so if you read it, or 65, so if you read it, you might see some things in there like that green-blue fire. Sounds a little bit like the wildfire from A Song of Ice and Fire. and there will be other revelations within the narrative that later science fiction definitely has included, and earlier science fiction would have included. In terms of some of the space aspects, I was reminded a little bit of Gateway by Frederick Pohl, one of my favorite science fiction novels. Not as a whole in terms of comparing the books, but more just in terms of what the space travel was described as. In terms of the questions around government in the media, 1984 by George Orwell came to mind. I recently reread Animal Farm, and so that sort of had been what led to reading The Fireclown. A book that I don't know if I've ever heard anybody else ever mention it, but a book that again deals with that idea of politics, media, and is set in the 1980s, I believe, and really like delves in it, is The Last Election by Pete Davies, and the idea of false flag operations or contrived narratives by governments to sort of retain power or change the narrative. The Last Election, 1984, Fireclown, all have elements of that. And then, of course, the Von Beck family figures in Michael Moorcock's books. Famously, the second volume of the Eternal Champion series, Von Beck, has the War Hound and the World's Pain, set during the 30 Years' War, and The City in the Autumn Stars, one of his best books, set around the French Revolution, if I remember correctly. So that's The Fireclown by Michael Moorcock. Thanks for listening. Let me know if you've read it, if you've read Michael Moorcock and like him, or can't stand him. I might go listen to some Hawkwind right now. So thanks, everybody. Bye.